Welcome to High Stakes, episode 29. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. High Stakes is produced by Mike Lawrence. You can find him on Twitter at Awesemo. And our guest today is Kyle Dvorchak. You can find him on Twitter at Kyle Tweets Here. Kyle is a great DFS and general fantasy sports content creator. He is also, I call him the king of overlay. He's known for chasing some overlay in DFS contests, and at one point in 2021 chased that overlay all the way to a milli maker in MLB, a high stakes milli maker in which he took second place for $200,000. Has had a lot of success in DFS and with his overlay chasing escapades. Kyle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I don't want to paint it as like it's actually literally not like the most lucrative venture, and you can tell because like I was grinding these like the NBA milli, like 2,500 milli tickets, had like 5 or 6 of them, like didn't even min cash one. So like you're gonna hear, we'll talk about this, and maybe this is some of me like trying to protect my edge just in a sort of subconscious level, but you'll hear about this and be like, oh, this sounds like just a money printing machine. And probably over the long term, like it would be like it's almost more like arbitrage than it is playing DFS, but like arbitrage is only good assuming there's like downswings too, which in DFS there would be, if you have the bankroll to handle it. And when I started, I certainly didn't, and now I am more selective in the sense of like a 1% edge in high stakes soccer. Like no, I'll pass on that one. We'll talk about it more, but I'm doing well, coming off of a sore spot last night on the NBA milli, but it's fine.
You said you had 5 tickets to that NBA milli?
Yeah.
And it was a what, $2,500 buy-in, something like
that?
Yeah. So like a lot of like ticket value there.
Equity,
equity that in that case resulted in a $0 outcome.
It's brutal. It's like,
but
I
think
the
about exact opposite in MLB, or obviously I guess the opposite would be winning the damn milli, but second place for 200,000 is about as good of an outcome as you can generally expect in these kind of contests too.
Yeah, I think the edge is like obvious. They are literally like you can get down action where DraftKings is like paying you to play, but it's for like super large field contest, or it's contest where it's winner take all because they're tickets, and the whole prize is first place. So like the swings are tremendously brutal, and I would think of as like a more casual player doing this, like you would probably want like some of your bankroll in this, but like as a casual player, unless you're like truly just playing for fun, like I wouldn't want to allocate every single dollar I had to like trying to grind milli tickets, which you're never like in your lifetime, you'll never realize milli equity. Like that's just the nature of the game. Right. Most players. So yeah. And I think like, and then some of these contests like run really good and get a bunch of tickets. Like the value of those tickets I spent, is 12,500. I maybe spent like $6,000 or so to get there, and you're like, oh man, what a great venture, what a great, as you called it, escapade. This is really just an easy way to secure my financial security for the rest of my life, and these brick all of them, just absolutely brick all of them. So the swings are like truly brutal, but like I think it's a sort of easy way to find a long-term edge.
Yeah, so I do want to jump into it more later, so we'll talk about that. We got a good question from Anthony Amico about your overlay chasing, and I want to get into it more. We'll follow up with that question, but talk about it a little bit more. But I'll just start by saying I don't think most of us have the attention span for it. Like most of us, like millennials, like I'm an older millennial, but I'm still a millennial. We just want like the immediate wins. We want the rush of like money hitting our accounts. You got to wait sometimes like months, right, to get your money.
Oh man, they're like for the World Cup blender, I think talked about this briefly, just mentioned it in passing or whatever. They were running like World Cup satellites for like months and months. And last year, I think maybe an Awesemo sub won the NASCAR milli. It was like early in the year, or at least they were like in the Discord or something. And they were running satellites for those for like 6+ months. So like you can run really good in terms of like ticket equity you are holding and be on a downswing, and then all of the quote money you have made is just sitting in the ether in tickets in your account that you'll end up breaking anyways. Right. So yeah, like sometimes you're holding these forever.
Yeah, that's got to be frustrating at times, but obviously the payoff is pretty great when those contests finally come, if you can make some money from them. But yeah, okay, we'll talk more about the overlay chasing a little bit later on, because I mean that's very interesting, and I think you're kind of unique in that. I don't think we have many people who like really chase overlay a ton.
I know a few others only because I see them in the lobby. I haven't talked to any of them.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, let's jump into your background just a little bit, because I mean, you've been doing content for what seems like a long time. Like you're a fairly young guy, youngish guy, and seems like you've been doing content for almost about as long, maybe not as long as I've been playing DFS, but as long as I've been aware of Awesemo, which is maybe 5 years ago. I think you were already doing content. You seem like you've been doing it for a very long time, and of course you played DFS. Now you're at NBC Sports Edge. Let's get into your background a little bit, but I'm going to start with just DFS background. Starting with, do you have any kind of background in statistics? Do you have formal or informal training?
Yeah, I mean, I took like statistics classes in high school and in college. Nothing super serious though, and I've tried to teach myself R. And like I think I think technically I'm a Zoomer. I'm right on the edge, but I think that Zoomer brain really just at 19 years old turned to concrete and can't pick things up. So every off season, I tell myself like really gonna hone down on like trying to learn R and like focus more on not just like I have a pretty strong understanding of Excel. I can do like anything I personally want to do there. But there are things I want to do that I can't or you can't do in Excel or is not nearly as easy. And my brain, it just doesn't learn things the way it used to. So I'm going to tell myself again this off season, like I've pushed Excel to its upper limits. I want to try and learn more of R. I know the very basics of like how to use the language, but I can't do anything in it. Other than that, it's like pretty like low level, just like statistical knowledge from like the basic college courses. I was like a marketing major, so you don't have to go too deep into the stats tree.
Oh, you're a marketing major. Okay. So you did a little bit of statistics. So you did take a statistics course, at least
Yeah,
in
one or two, I
college.
think. Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing like crazy though.
Yeah. So like minimal background, some background in statistics, and that's the extent of your computer programming, and also just trying to learn R and a little bit Excel or any more computer programming.
No, that's it. I know Excel pretty well. But like Excel isn't the most useful tool, especially like when you're trying to like get into like modeling and simulations. Like Excel is pretty good for like a lot of like data work, but like low level data work. But I want to push myself more. Every time I try, it doesn't work out.
Okay. Tell me about your professional background prior to DFS or any related hobbies. Am I correct that you've been doing DFS related content for like 5 years, or am I just
No, it's about right.
overshooting that? Okay.
No, that's about right. I think like my first ever content was just like regular fantasy football stuff like 5 or 6 years ago, but I was like doing some very basic don't go back and find it type of content.
And I assume you were like right out of college at that point.
I was in college whenever I started
Oh, you
doing
were in
content. I think I was like a sophomore in
No way.
college.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're only a few years out of college now then.
Yeah, 2 or 3. Yeah, probably
Okay.
coming up on 3 years out of college.
All right, yeah, that's probably about what I would have guessed, except you've been doing content for so long. I didn't realize that you were in college when you started. So that's pretty awesome. So you started doing DFS content a little bit in college, and it seems like that's probably your entire professional. Or do you have a professional background outside of fantasy sports content?
Yeah, I had one normie job out of college, one like non-hour industry job. It was a very paper pushing job that I hated, and I quit that job whenever I started Awesemo because like I was doing enough freelance work here and at other sites that I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do in the spring when the NFL season is over, and that was the COVID season. And when we started getting teams who were they were pushing games back, postponing them a few days, I was like, if the league goes on a pause for a week or two, like I won't be getting a paycheck for a week or two, but I like hated my normie job so much that I was like, I'm gonna freelance a ton, like work a ton for the lead up, about the month before, and then the football season, and I'll figure it out from there. And I think after that, I began work full time at NBC. But I had one paper pushing job for a year, give or take.
So you started only with fantasy football. I know that you play other sports. I guess off the top of my head, you've done content for sports outside of NFL as well, haven't you?
I don't think so. Just I mean,
Oh, really?
I did
Okay.
I did XFL and USFL content. I think that's it.
For a while, I feel like you and Matt Kajeski, in my mind, like you two did shows together. Like I feel like you guys
And
did
you
a number of
relate that
shows.
he is the college guy. Yeah, we
Yeah, yeah.
did. We both were NFL guys though. When I started Awesemo.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, that is funny though because we just coincidentally got lined up on almost every show together. As scheduling worked out that way, and the shows they were putting us on were like the new guys shows.
Right.
And we both started on almost the same weekend or whatever. So yeah, we did a ton of shows, and but they were all NFL. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you've only done NFL. So what are you going to be doing during the off season then? Now you got this job at NBC Sports Edge. Are you going to be doing? I guess there's like best ball. There's off season NFL stuff. Are you still just doing NFL stuff?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll do USFL or XFL content this time around. I'll probably still play DFS for those, but also like there is an off season for my job in that I go from working a massive amount to having a reasonable amount of time off.
Yeah.
But I won't be done working like as soon as the season ends. Prepare for the combine, the draft, more like some fantasy stuff, but also just like real life NFL
Right.
content that isn't as focused on the game we play, and certainly not focused on DFS in the middle of April or whatever. So, yeah, and also I just want some time off. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose when you're just kind of reporting about the NFL too, it doesn't always have to be related to fantasy sports. Of course, that's the
yeah.
only content that I do. And I suppose it sounds like you might be playing the same game that we are of like maybe we'll do XFL, USFL content depending on how big the contests are, what kind of
Oh
interest
my
there is and that
god,
kind of stuff.
dude.
Like at this point, they screwed up USFL so bad or this past year that I'm kind of worried that they're going to take that as, oh, nobody has interest in USFL because DraftKings screwed up their product. So they're going to say, well, nobody wanted to play these contests and they're just not going to do it. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Is do you have the same worry there with they're just
Yeah,
not going to
I have
do
bad vibes
contests?
from it. I get bad vibes. Like they started giving the tickets away. You and me, and I think maybe Cody Main from ETR saw that the ticket was called like XFL 15K ticket.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh man. Because I think the first USFL contest was 100K to first. And I think that was the same of the XFL, 2 years ago now,
Yep.
almost 3 years ago now.
2020.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I don't get great vibes. And I will say they definitely screwed it up. And also the USFL's injury reporting was terrible. Like it was
Yeah.
not a good, like, from a fan standpoint, you probably don't care too much about that, at least not to the extent that you and I and the
Right.
grinders do. But like those first five, they got it together at the end. The second half of the season was much better. Those first 5 weeks sucked. They were so frustrating. And then the first week, DK bombed it. Obviously, they made right on their mistake. I think everyone got at worst neutral,
Right.
no
They free rolled it.
losses, and then
Yep.
they paid the rest out, obviously. But yeah, they completely bombed that. And then a lot of the contest overlaid to late in the season, which maybe they got the ball rolling to no one playing their contest on their own. Maybe people were never going to play it. But yeah, it wasn't a great sign. I think XFL, it was only 5 weeks. I thought that held on a lot longer. And also, I thought people just like there was more excitement about the league. That league too was
Yeah.
my vibe. I don't know if that's true based on the numbers.
That is also my memory. I also like I was not into XFL in the 90s, might shock some people. I didn't watch it as a kid. Then one of my friends was a big fan of the XFL in the 90s and started, saying to a group of us, hey, do you guys want to get together, watch some XFL games this year and stuff? So I was like, all right, I guess if we're going to get together, watch some XFL, then I will
Get some
uh,
action on it.
get some action on it. And yes, so XFL started off with 100,000 a first contest for the first like 2 or 3 weeks, and then by the fifth week, I think it was down to like 50,000 a first on both sites. But they kept relatively big contests, and they even like split them up. Like there was they'd have 2 games Saturday, 2 games Sunday. They do contests separately for both of those, and then also contests for both. Like they were doing a lot of contests
I
with some
forgot
pretty big
FanDuel
prizes.
had XFL contests because they didn't have USFL, correct?
Yeah, or
And
it was really small enough that I
I
didn't
think
pay
I think they
attention if they
literally
did.
didn't, if
Okay.
I remember correctly. They just opted not to do it, which without win for DraftKings, maybe that makes sense. I forgot they had content. I was also traveling the fifth and final week of the season, and I was happy. I forgot that I was going to be in a state that didn't let you play DFS, so I missed out on the final week of that. That was fun, and there was also way less content around it. Like I think
Yeah.
Awesemo had some very basic, like wasn't pushing it in the way that you guys push USFL. I think ETR was kind of the same way. They put something together at the very end. So like if you were grinding these teams, especially in the opening few weeks, like you really could have a massive edge where and like Run the Sims wasn't, or I don't even think existed back then.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it did.
So there was just such a lack of good content. And even when there was good content, it just wasn't as popular as it was the second time around. And part of that was because there was a lack of content. Everyone jumped in to fill the void, right? Everyone's like,
Right.
oh man, I can, sell this product, whatever. And totally, it's like, fine, I'm not complaining about that. But the edge the second time around was not nearly as good as the edge the first time around. And if the prize pools are going to be smaller and the product from a few angles last year from DK's end was not good, like I probably will still play. I think I don't have a strong desire to make content about it.
Yes, I think I'm kind of the same way. I will play as long as the contests are big enough. I think I would enjoy maybe doing content about it, but I also like I don't watch college football. Like I won't know the players going in. Like later on, maybe I'll get some idea of like just like using DFS game theory, like this player is going to be over owned, this player is going to be
Yeah.
under owned, but like going in, I'm not really going to have any kind of like, oh, this quarterback's great, like any kind of opinions on the actual players. But yeah, so 2020 XFL season was going great, got cut short after 5 weeks because of COVID. USFL comes around, and we've talked about how DraftKings screwed that up. For people who are unaware, DraftKings gave away like, I don't know, 20,000 tickets to a 30,000 person contest or something like that for week one of USFL. And so a lot of pros who had been planning on 150 max it didn't get into the contest because they gave away so many tickets that a lot of pros who may have been interested in playing some USFL were not actually able to play it. And I think that kind of burned some bridges. Like people are just like, well, I at this point I'm behind the eight ball. I don't really know how this game works, so they just kind of gave up and didn't play. But then on top of that, on top of giving away 20,000 tickets,
This is the kicker.
This is the kicker.
Truly awful.
So the games are staggered. There's, I think it was also 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday, maybe
Something like that.
something like that. And at lock of the very first game, DraftKings showed ownership for every player in the contest, like even games that had not started yet. But then they took it, they went back and locked only the game that had started and allowed you to swap for the other 3 games after you saw the ownership for those games. So just like, which is a huge thing. Obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know by now it's pretty big edge to know the actual ownership or close to what it's going to be and adjust from there. So it was just a pretty
huge edge if you were willing to go through all of your lineups and be like, oh, well, obviously I didn't know. I think there was like Breakers players, the New Orleans Breakers, was like one of their receivers was like super, super chalky because like all the content sites thought he was a good player or whatever. And the thing is, no one actually late swapped. No one.
I know.
No one. Did you?
I did not. So I was going to say, I'm a little bit ashamed to admit I made 0 swaps. And part of that is because, so different from other sports, we had no idea going in. Like it was just like, we were all kind of randomly guessing like who's going to get playing time anyway. So it was like, I don't know. Like you can see the ownership. I have no feel for whether that's over owned or under owned. And I ended up, because like I'd spent a lot of time, like, I think I want about this much of this player, about this much of this player. And it was like, I don't know, the ownership was close enough to where I thought it was gonna be, where I was like, I think these lineups are still good enough. Like, I don't think they really need to be making any changes here. And of course, that was wrong. Like in retrospect, like the guys who were super chalky, I think all failed, right? Like they generally the super chalky players like didn't play, but at that point didn't really know yet that how volatile it was in USL. Did you late swap at all there?
Yeah, I did a handful by hand. I should have redone the whole thing. Like I should have been like, all right, let's go back and like redone everything. Mostly I just went through and like a few players that were like, I think what you said at the beginning, which is probably a lesson that applies to other sort of DFS things, is like we had no clue who was good or bad. We didn't know. That's perfect. That tells you that like all of the players should be like say we have like a slight idea of who is literally going to play. They should all just have perfectly even flat distribution of ownership. It'd be as if in like a golf contest, there are 60 golfers, each of them has 1 of 60 odds, and they have the exact same of winning or whatever. And they, there's nothing else, like no players are more or less volatile. You would just say like, oh, the solved game is you play all of them at a 1 in 60 rate, assuming everyone does that, right? And that was probably true for weeks in the USFL because like the reporting was not great. The injury reporting was non-existent. The rotations changed all the time. So like truly the answer was like to be nihilistic and say like anything that happened, you want like if you are playing like a sort of balance style, just play you almost an even amount of everyone, right? And if you want to play more strategic, play a ton of the guys no one's going to play because just because he was a backup last week could have been. And we knew this at least a little bit in week 1 because we knew that we didn't know anything. We didn't know how volatile it'd be, but we knew like, oh man, I think this guy's the receiver 3, but the New Orleans Breakers don't have a beat reporter to tell us who's been running. And yeah, I did some like half-hearted efforts of like, oh, this guy was like 60%. Like, we don't know anything. I'll swap a handful of him. It wasn't my best effort put in. It was some effort, but we really should have been, myself included, I didn't try that hard, much more aggressive. And this carried through with just our turn. Like this was the time for GPP bros to shine because this stuff was a mess. And I myself did not play nearly aggressive enough, especially in that first week, and no one did. We saw ownership and it changed like fractions of percent for some players.
And I was part of the problem. I mean, like I said, I don't think I made a single swap, and part of that's because I had spread out so much already. Like I had already been taking a lot of shots on these players that I didn't think anybody else was going to play. So I was like, well, took me a long time to kind of get to these lineups for whatever reason. I remember struggling to get to lineups that I liked. So finally did before lock, and I was like, I just don't want to go back in and mess with it because I spent too much time. But obviously, you're correct that it was the wrong move. Like we should have really been looking at the ownership after it came out and adjusting. But enough about USFL and XFL. Now that we've lost 95% of our listeners who just do not care at all about USFL and XFL, let's get back to your background a little bit. So, okay, going back to where you started. So you get out of college, you have one normie job. Otherwise, you've been essentially doing fantasy sports slash football content. I guess football and fantasy football content.
Yep.
Basically since college, other than that one normie job.
Yep.
Okay, and then so approximately, you kind of already said this, but approximately when did you start getting involved in DFS? But also, what drew you into daily fantasy sports or football content?
I think the first time I made a DraftKings account, and I was like obviously just like a terrible normie player. I was like a freshman or sophomore in college. It was like a year before I started doing content, but it wasn't a year before I started doing DFS content. And the reason I got involved in DFS was I was doing content, and someone's like, "Do you play DFS?" And I was like, "All the time, man. I love the DFA and the S. It's all the best. Of course. Do you need me to write an article?" And at that point, I was like, "Well, I better start like taking this a bit more seriously." And I did. Though like I wouldn't really start like grinding harder for another year or two. So I've probably only been playing like 4 years, like actually caring and trying to think about the game smartly. I think my DraftKings account maybe got started 6 years ago. I don't Sounds about right.
And were you a winning player right away?
Definitely not. I think I got lucky and maybe was a winning player by like dollars, but no, I was like a terrible normie player for a year or so before someone asked me to care about it. Said we'll pay you to write an article. I don't even actually, it probably wasn't a paid article, but they're like, we'll get, I was trying to grind and make it in the content space. So like, we want you to write an article. At that point, I committed myself to caring more, but definitely for that first year, I was like truly the most casual fan.
And it's hard to even know. I mean, whether you say you might have gotten lucky and been winning by dollars, but like that's kind of the nature of GPPs too, right? Like you lose almost every day until you have
Yeah.
that one win that pays it all off. So maybe you were a good player. Maybe just
It was also an easier time back then. It was
That's a good
20
point.
whatever 16 or 17. So maybe just being a knowledgeable normie was like a little above break even. So you could be right.
Yeah, it's true. Maybe you're winning relative to the time, and you've been able to adjust as the contests have gotten better, and we have to continue getting better as the field does as well. Okay, I guess you already answered this question. In which sport or sports do you think you have the biggest edge? So I'll reframe the question. In which type of contest do you think you have the biggest edge? Showdown versus classic versus flash draft, whatever other contest. Where do you think you have the biggest edge in terms of type of contest?
That's so perfect. I think this is a more applicable question. I think like on a regular thing, NFL, just I don't really know a ton about all the other sports. I use a lot of the Stokastic stuff to grind overlay in the other sports, and when the overlay is good enough, that is enough to be a winning player. And also, like I understand the strategy, but I think small field showdown contests across almost any sport, because typically those are sports where not duping matters, and or showdown is the type where not duping matters, and small field contests because those are mostly what I'm getting overlay in, and not duping when the entire first place or the entire value of the contest goes to first place ticket. Not having a duped lineup is really, really valuable, and gauging how far you're willing to go for a not duped lineup because you want to be you don't want to chop the ticket or whatever. Gauging how far you want to go for that matters a lot, or getting that balance right. So I think any showdown contest where it's like 1,000 or probably even like anywhere between under 5,000. I think once you get to large field showdown, like I'm probably still not playing aggressive enough, and looking at top players lineups like are getting to players that like I wouldn't have and should have been doing, because those have been long-term profitable players. So smaller field showdown contests, because showdown usually dupes matter. Yeah, those are probably where I have the biggest edge.
Okay, so you're because you're familiar with wanting to be aggressive and non-duped in showdown, but you think you're not quite aggressive enough for the large field GPPs, but you're aggressive enough to take down those like 5,000 or less kind of contests. So I was gonna ask like what size you're talking about with small field, but you're not talking about like 10 field. Like you're still talking about GPPs, like up to like a 5,000 people in it.
Yeah, I was saying more like I can understand how leveraged you need to be for
Yep.
5,000. Most of it is smaller, but I think up to somewhere in that range, like you can conceive of like the amount of leverage you need to use after that or use at that point. Most of it is smaller though, like 500 or less, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right. And a lot of it is like 10 mans and stuff, but you see like three people do the obvious like NBA showdown cash game lineup. Like any 10 o'clock Nuggets game, like Jokic is the captain. I don't need to tell you like that. And you're playing like two backup scrubs or whatever to fit him and whoever, LeBron on the other side. And people just play that lineup two or three times. And that, when it's a when it's a contest that pays out a ticket, is functionally the same as overlay, assuming you're not duping that lineup, because those lineups are the same. You're not competing against them at all anymore. One copy of them or whatever. So those ones I think are where I have the best feel of like how many projected points I am willing to give up to get a non-duped lineup. Because in a 10-man contest, it really is like, you probably have to worry about leverage so much less that you're like, I will just play. If you told me these are the lineups I'm playing against, I would just take the highest projected lineup that isn't in that set list. I'm pretty good at finding that and sizing that for the contest.
Okay. Yeah. And for people who don't track what Kyle's saying when he says that you're not competing against those lineups that are mega dupe, he's not saying that they're not in the contest. It's just like it might be like 30 lineups or 30 different entries that are all the same lineup. So it's essentially those 30 can be reduced to is essentially just one spot that you're playing against as opposed to 30 spots. Is that basically what you're saying when you say you don't really have to worry about that lineup as much because it's duped so many times? You're obviously you're still in the contest. It's not like the lineup is removed from the contest because it's duped, but it's just you're essentially reducing the number of lineups in the contest by 29 in that case.
Yes, exactly. In any contest that doesn't pay out first place only, you still obviously don't want to be duped, but at least those other 29 entries in this 30 lineup train example, those 29 other entries take the money from second through 30th or whatever. Right. So it is worse for you that lineup would win, that it does take up some of the money. When it's only first place, those other 29 entries from your perspective like are just overlay. They all kill each other off. Obviously, if you dupe with them, it matters, but not doing that is kind of the name of the game.
Yep, exactly. So I know you mentioned that you don't really play other sports as much other than chasing overlay. So have you played any NBA Showdown?
On
chasing overlay?
Oh yeah, NBA Showdown. Yeah, pretty much. I think I've played every sport in the lobby. Okay. Yeah, I played every sport. I don't know if I played every sport, every type. Like I haven't played like NBA Flash Draft or whatever. Or I probably have played pretty much every like even tiers for all the other contests. Pretty rarely though. But yeah, I played every sport and I think to some degree, like yes, like the overlay helps. Like I do have an understanding. Like I don't want to say I'm good at this, right? Like I don't think anyone wants to be like, yeah, I'm so good at this. I have a basic understanding of like tournament strategy in which when DraftKings gives you some leniency by letting there be overlay, that strategy is helpful. So I don't want to say like I'm just an idiot who plays the cash game lineup in Showdown or whatever. Yeah. I understand strategy. Stokastic's projections for both ownership and points are good and help me further that strategy, but I don't follow. I like casually follow like the NBA and the NHL. I think last year I played some NHL just on my own, but yeah, for the most part, NFL is the only and the other leagues of professional football when they come around are the only ones I will play, not just chasing overlay for the most part.
Okay. I would guess you're pretty good at this just based on I've consumed enough of your content that like you clearly know what you're doing, and I would guess that translates to other sports as well. So I know you don't want to say like, oh, I'm good at this, but I would guess that you're pretty good at being able to figure out the different types of contests you're playing for whatever sport you're playing. But what I was curious about when asking about NBA Showdown is, so that's a contest that people ask me about from time to time, and I don't play it because I'm like, well, I'm trying to avoid dupes, and I think that works so much better in NFL Showdown than NBA Showdown because there's so much more variability in NFL, whereas NBA, it's like the projections are so good that if you're giving up, 10 points in projection on a Showdown slate, then I'm like, is that too? I mean, 10 points is maybe not so much, but like, you know what I mean? Like it's so much more projectable that I feel like it's so much harder to beat the rake long term in NBA Showdown because the projections are so good as opposed to NFL. So I'm curious, like, have you had success at all in NBA Showdown? And maybe when you add in, since you're playing contests where I'm guessing you're not playing NBA Showdown unless there is overlay. Is that fair
Correct.
to
Yeah,
say?
that's true of every sport, but the professional football ones. Not even I won't even play like college football or whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, I totally agree. That's totally accurate in that like it is maybe like you could probably find like blowout spots where like the backups should be 2.5% owned and they're 0.7, but like you're working with
Right.
really, really small margins there. Where NFL, I totally agree. There are dudes who are going to run like 15 routes, get 2 targets, and they'll be 2% owned because they have scored. They haven't scored in scored a fantasy point in 3 weeks, but they run some routes. They get the occasional targets, and if that's a touchdown, like that's ball game right there, right? Like that's the guy you have to have. And those edges are so much more pronounced. I would totally believe you or believe a player who plays these if you told me that like the 10-man 1K buy-in NBA Showdown late slate, that's like a solved game because the projections are so accurate that we know to such a high degree, to a degree of certainty that is within what the rake takes, that what is going to happen and how you should be playing. I guess in large field, people still dupe too much to the point where there is some edge. That's just guessing though. But yeah, I would totally believe mid and high stakes, like small slate NBA Showdown, you're only getting good players there. They know exactly what they're doing. And I'd believe you if you told me it's a solid game. I'm sure some people would say it's beatable. I don't know though. Like I agree that NBA, if I wasn't playing for overlay, it'd be one of the first sports I would not play, especially like at a high stakes level.
Yeah. Okay. So we're on the same page there. Yeah. I don't know that it's not beatable. I just like I like just conceptually I'm like, unlike NFL, I'm like, man, it's just so hard to like, how do you avoid dupes while still having a lineup that projects well enough that has a real shot at winning? It just feels like a tougher equation for NBA. So I haven't found it to be worth my time. But yeah, I suppose the contest you're playing, you're kind of chasing overlay anyway, so like it kind of reduces some of that concern, I guess. Anyway, just curious to hear what your thoughts on NBA Showdown. Let's talk a little bit about process, and I guess we can maybe we'll continue talking about process a little bit as we get to the Anthony's question and talk more about the overlay chasing, because I'm guessing the process is different for different sports, like depending on how much knowledge you have, etc. And since you're doing things so last minute, it's going to be a little bit different for those sports where you are chasing overlay. So let's start by talking process for NFL in particular, because you said NFL is the one contest where you'll play even if there is not overlay. Is that correct?
Yeah, not a ton still. I this is like a dumb way to frame it. I probably wouldn't like be on this show if I was just playing like my normal NFL. Like I try and play as a smart, intelligent player, but I just wouldn't get a ton of action down there. If it weren't for chasing overlay, I'd still play some. I like it too. I just enjoy the NFL game the most, and it's what my job focuses on. So
Right.
have like a high domain knowledge, but that's the only one that like I really play. I will say like when I get like last night for the NBA thing, like I wasn't just like, oh, let's show up, build some lineups and chase some overlay. Like had some serious equity there. Or like MMA, like on the MMA, you know, the whatever the MMA DraftKings live final or whatever is, those like low level contests, some like the $50 satellite or whatever, those ones will overlay and I'll throw something together. But sometimes you get like they're planning a 5-5-5 or whatever a few weeks or a month out, and they're kind of overlaying some tickets to that. Like I will grind for those, like on the day of the slate, like we'll really spend much more time. So it also depends on like theoretically just how much I'm getting down. If I've got like you know, like the NHL live final to live, it was during the COVID year. That one, like I will try and like really like dig deeper and spend more time on it. If it's like NBA Showdown, there's $50 of overlay at 9:55 at night. I won't put as much effort in. So it depends on like essentially how much I'm getting down is what it boils down to.
Right. Well, and I also suppose, and this, you know, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, I guess. But I suppose it depends on like when you are chasing the overlay. Typically, you won't have spent as much time on it. Whereas these are examples of like you've already
I know
got the
ahead of
ticket.
time.
Yeah, you know ahead of time that I'm going to be in this contest. Well, then
Yes.
you're going to spend more time on it, and it's going to be a
Also very
different
true.
process for those types of
Yes.
contests. Okay. All right. So getting back to just more general, and I guess you can answer this for other sports as well if the answer differs. But okay, do you use or do you do any simulations of your own, or use simulations from outside sources as part of your process for NFL or any other sport?
Just whatever. So I don't do any of my own simulations. I've done the only thing I've ever done, and that's because like it pushes the extent of my Excel knowledge, is like simulations for my bankrolls. Like, what's a normal downswing? Like, you can just simulate the contest because if you assume that everyone is as skilled, which is not true, but just to get a general idea of like what's a reasonable downswing. Like, I lost $20,000 over this amount of time. Is that, oh, that's actually almost a fortunate downswing.
Right.
That's the only thing I've ever done that would like approach, and in some technical sense, it would be a simulation. It's just distributing outcomes over a large amount of time, but not for the actual game outcomes.
Okay. As you said, or you started to say, I think, outside of Stokastic, like
Yeah.
the boom bust tool,
Stochastic
like
content.
involves
Yes.
simulations, but like, yeah,
Yes.
okay. And then, so do you use an optimizer at all in building your lineups?
Yeah, I use Fantasy Cruncher because it comes with my Stokastic sub, my legacy sub that they gave me while I'm working. And every time I come on the show, I'm like, Nolan, you want to boot up my sub for another year? No, great guy though. Nolan hired me like on the spot when I was,
Oh, that's awesome.
when I was in I don't want to say desperate need of a job, but I did hate my job, my old normie job. So yeah, good times working here. And I've used the solver a few times just out of curiosity, because sometimes they'll do it for free.
Yeah.
Like they open it up for free with the national championship college football, just out of curiosity. But Fantasy Cruncher works for me, so I don't feel the need to use anything else.
Yeah, that's obviously typically what I use also. So do you are there contests? Do you always use an optimizer? I guess would be my follow-up question. Or do you sometimes, like when you have that ticket and you are really thinking, giving a lot of thought, and you've only got 5 tickets, right? Like so last night would be an example. You had 5 tickets to this NBA contest. Do you sometimes hand build, or do you always end up using an optimizer?
No, I mean, I don't think I'll, maybe in NFL I will every now and then, because like I almost just know the projections. Like I could basically tell you, like I could just eyeball it and say, like, this is the cash game lineup. These are players who are pivots off of that without having to look at any website's numbers. But for like NBA, I would have no clue that like all of OKC starters are out. So a bunch of their like backups, like Mike Muscala or whatever, is going to get 35 minutes tonight. I just wouldn't know. uh yeah, I could maybe hand build not terrible lineups for like NHL or MMA maybe, or a lot of times for like sports that I don't have like projections on, like weird soccer slates or whatever. I'll pull up like Vegas odds, and you can get like goal score odds, shots odds, which like if there's good overlay, that could be enough to scoop some like stupid king of the pitch ticket or whatever. But almost for every sport, I will use projections. And sometimes, I'll go into Fantasy Cruncher and like start hand building within there, but I need to see the ownership and the projections for sports I'm not like as familiar with.
Okay. So it's rare for you to hand build. You're typically using the optimizer. Okay. Do you, so I'm guessing I know the answer. You've sort of answered these. All right. Do you create your own projections from scratch for any sport?
No, I closest I came was the first year of XFL. I just tried to create like relative power number ratings, basically, of like it doesn't matter if this team runs 50 plays or 25 plays if I get their relative distance to other teams correct. And the same with like target share numbers, like assuming I have a I can compare teams relatively. I didn't care too much if the numbers were right. And that's like the only thing I've ever done that were close to projections. And they were pretty solid because it's like Houston something. I don't remember these 4 teams anymore. They were great. It was a team with PJ Walker. So my numbers like them, which was fun.
Nice.
And then for USFL, every now and then I would DM Matt Kajaski, who was grinding USFL, and be like, why does this guy have this target share?
Yeah. Nice. Okay. So generally not doing your own projections from scratch, but maybe sometimes adjusting.
And I won't do that again. That was way too much work, especially now that other people, back in the XFL days, it was one of the last times, these like sports that pop up, like a whole new league pops up, will be like the last times there are information edges where just like knowing more about them is an edge that is like easily acquired. Like we were talking about this before the show. Like for some people, there still is that edge, like petty theft in NBA. Like we'll just come up with different projection numbers that are like way off and correct seemingly. But that's a pretty rare occurrence. And even now, it'll be less often with like sites like Stokastic doing really good USFL. And I assume, again, USFL, XFL numbers. So I won't even try to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess we'll find out soon enough if we're going to have USFL and XFL projections and such here. I'm interested to know. And so do you do anything related to your own ownership projections?
No, every once in a while, like, you can eyeball and say like, I don't see, like, I've been listening. I try to listen to like as much content as I can, be like, like everyone's talking about this player, but for the most part, it would be like small adjustments of just like, oh, I know better. Like I've listened to all the content. This guy is going to be, higher owned, or a lot of sites do their projections based on like the large field contest in which, last night in the NBA stuff. I don't know. Like, I don't know any of these players, like Dwayne Washington, some guy
Yeah.
for, Phoenix, getting a ton of minutes. Like, he's the best value play this, like, I know he's going to be in a high stakes contest more owned than he will be in the large field, which is what the projections are for, but like slight adjustments to already good baselines.
I've been playing NBA DFS since 2013. I think, going to start doing some NBA content next week. And I went into play yesterday. I was like, who the hell is this Dwayne Washington guy? Like, I had no idea who he was. And I'm like, pretty into the NBA. I watch a good amount of NBA. I've been playing for, I didn't know who he was. So can't hold that against yourself that you weren't that familiar with Dwayne Washington. Would you call yourself an exploitative DFS player?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be. I think like I am not as exploitative in probably other sports in which I don't know as much about them. I guess I don't know though. Maybe just only knowing the numbers makes you in some sense more exploitative, in which I'm like, no clue how this guy's performed, how Dwayne Washington couldn't tell you a single thing about his game. Don't know, hardly know what position he plays. DraftKings lists him as, I think, point guard, shooting guard, or whatever. Couldn't tell you a thing about him, but I can tell you that in the large field, his ownership's going to go up, and maybe that's still not enough for the types of lineups I'm building. So definitely exploitative. Maybe the only exceptions would just be like in 5-mans, in which I guess this is sort of even exploitative, but like in a 5-man contest that's filled at 3, like you can probably just drop your cash game lineup in there. Maybe you get duped. If you know who's in it, you actually could probably tell if you'll get duped or not. Like if it's just Mock Levin and one other person there, Mock Levin's also playing the cash game lineup. So I guess avoiding the literal cash game lineup is sort of exploitative, but it's like the lowest level of that.
Yeah. But yeah, it's totally exploitative to an extent. All right. Well, so we've got a couple questions from listeners, both related to chasing overlay, which so we've been kind of saving some of the overlay chase talk a little bit for this section. I guess the first one wasn't really a question. John Kelly DFS says, I see he's in the NBA Millie tonight. This was yesterday. See, he's in the NBA Millie tonight as well. I'm sure he won Saddies into it. He doesn't pay full price for anything. Kid is a stud. Is it true that you, so he didn't actually ask a question, he was just commenting. Is it true though that you do not pay full price for anything?
In DFS, it's almost always true, except for like the little bit of NFL I play on my own. I'm probably pretty nitty in real life too. Like,
Okay.
that's probably, I mean, those two things are almost certainly related, that like I am relatively cheap in real life, and also like the idea of just trying to arbitrage at DFS as opposed to like thinking too much about it.
I mean, it seems like a great strategy, to be honest. Just chasing value, like, seems very sharp to me. All right. Anthony Amico says, oh, baby, pumped for this one. Definitely would love to hear about Kyle's game selection on the overlay. He has spray and pray, specific contests, etc., and the kinds of lineups he's playing there. Are you just taking slates off that don't have overlay, or is it an add-on to your current volume? So I was very curious about this as well, because I mean, so you kind of said that you are typically, if you are chasing overlay, it is more last minute, like you're not necessarily preparing as much. Tell me about that, I guess, more generally. Like, is that true? Like, when you're chasing overlay, are you not preparing as much ahead of time, or like, can you kind of tell like an hour and a half before the slate starts, like, I'm guessing there's going to be some overlay in these kind of contests? You prepare as usual, and then like Anthony asked, just take slates off sometimes if there doesn't end up being overlay. Tell me about your thought process there in terms of when you decide to play contests, how much work you put in when you are in the chasing overlay part of your process.
Yeah, you kind of like, especially like for the NBA Millie, they're running satellites like months in advance, at least many weeks in advance, and they run one contest on Tuesday night or whatever. It doesn't fill, and you see it in the lobby the next day. It's probably not going to fill again. So sometimes you do know, but other times, like, yeah, I will have, I don't prepare too much ahead of time, luckily, but sometimes totally, like, I'm like, oh, might be some overlay in NBA. Let me just like build a few lineups. Like, I can see which contests might be the ones to overlay. So I know about, like, I'm at least trying to eyeball like how much leverage, like how much projection I'm willing to give up to not do, but also to try and build good, better than 1%, top 1% equity type of lineups. And then like as the numbers tick down, I'm like, well, everything's filled 10 minutes before lock, misjudged that one. So and yeah, there are like some sports like really overlay has to be good. Mostly soccer. Like soccer is the one I think is like probably the hardest lobby because there are not many players that play soccer and they're all like true, like really good players. So for a sport like soccer, like if I see like, oh, it might overlay, I'm like, don't care, not going to play that one.
And as Anthony alluded to, like the way you play, and as we've talked about a little bit on this show already, the way the lineup you enter is going to depend on the size of the contest, how many entries are in the contest. So I guess how much foresight are you giving to like, I think this, 5,000 person contest is going to overlay enough that I want to play it versus like this 11-person contest? Like, are you planning for every scenario, starting, I don't know, half an hour before lock, or what's your process in terms of like choosing lineups for the contest? Or like, do you, choose a lineup and then only play if the contest fits the lineup that you've chosen? How does that kind of selection process work for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm playing for every scenario, but I'm like, oh, there are like a handful of like 5 to 25 mans that'll fill that. Like you should probably have a different strategy for 5 mans versus 25. It's like there would be and especially if the 5 man doesn't fill 2 and it's at 4 or 3, like even that would technically be a bit of a different strategy. But for the sake of like my time and also just like the speed of which I still haven't figured out. And I think the answer is the apps aren't, it turns out, built for this dumb gameplay style of just grinding these like last second entries. Not an easy way to be like, okay, I have to remember the lineup I need, or sometimes you can just enter your, say like the 5 man is important because it's a $500 entry. I don't want to enter the 5,000 person contest lineup into that one. Like I'd be giving up way too much. So I will just enter a bunch of, I'll call it the cash game lineup, the 5 man lineup in 10-cent contest because it moves to the front of your queue on the DraftKings app. And as far as I can tell, the DraftKings website for doing this is just so incredibly slow. There would not be an easy way to do it. So you just like force the queue to get your highest projected lineups in order, basically. But I'm not as judicious as I could be with like, this one's for 5 mans, this one's for 25 mans, but I will like group them out to know like, and yeah, sometimes, actually a lot of times, ones just don't get used because they, all the 5, 10, and 15 mans filled. Don't need any of the cash adjacent lineups. A few of the $3 and $5 satellites didn't fill. So those scroll to the back of the line of lineups and enter those. So not planning for every scenario, but at least trying to have like a spectrum of lineups or a few groups of lineups that do match to some degree their contest. But I could definitely push that part harder.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And I guess maybe you kind of asked us already, but are there times that you like spend the time to make lineups and then everything, all the overlay you're chasing fills up and you just don't play the slate?
Yeah, it's really annoying, but definitely.
Is that hard? Like to like you put in the work, like who you want to win or like who you're needing to do well, and then you just don't have any action on it? Like is that tough for you? And especially has it ever happened that you have decided not to play, or I'm not going to play contests because there's no overlay, and then seeing all of your players like do great, and is that going to be frustrating at times?
Well, for them, I wouldn't know if they were not doing great because I wouldn't enter anything, and it's not like I'm like following NBA.
Oh, you just don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, I just wouldn't pay attention. Like I don't watch NBA most nights. Every once in a while, I'll be at a bar and watch it or something. But like I haven't watched an NBA game at home since I live in Charlotte. So I watched like the Hornets lose in the play-in game or whatever last year. That was the last time I watched an NBA game just at home for fun. So I truly wouldn't know if the players are doing well unless they were in a live lineup. But yeah, definitely happens. And every once in a while, I experience a moment of weakness. Like, all right, putting this one in a $5. Can't have done all this work for nothing. I won't like do anything stupid. Like, all right, I built 30 lineups. Time to enter the 5-5-5 a bunch or whatever. Every once in a while, I'll be like, I can't have done all this work for nothing. But what if I did it for $5, which after the rake is worth about $4.72 or whatever. But yeah, totally happens. And like, it's not the worst because I'm not like grinding all day unless I know I'm playing like we talked about earlier, but definitely does happen. And it is like, well, there goes, 40 minutes, half hour of my time. A lot of times I'll try and work building lineups into other parts of my schedule. So at least I am like not like, babe, we can't go out tonight. Might be $200 an overlay. And then she's like,
Right.
how'd it go? I'm like, didn't play tonight. So yeah.
Let me take a minute away from this conversation with Kyle Dvorchak to tell you that we've got a great offer for new users only. You can get full access to everything Stokastic has to offer for NFL for 5 days free. Projections, ownership, 1v1 tools, lineup generator, top stacks tool, zero risk because it's all free. So sign up now using the link in the description of this video. Note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on that can be added after the fact. Okay, so how small would a contest have to be where you'd be willing to play your cash game lineup in the contest?
To like, I guess it depends on what sport, because like in NHL, like the cash game will be similar, but like I will find random variations that like I'm just going off the numbers where like other people who know a little more about NHL are seeing like other things that I'm not seeing. So we'll have similar lineups, but I can actually bet if I run the top optimal lineup from Awesemo, it may not get duped in a small contest. Whereas in NBA, even in a 5-man, if I run the top lineup from Awesemo, like pretty decent chance it's getting duped, especially on like a late on the 10 p.m. 2-game slate. That probably will get duped. If not, it'll be really close. And I don't even want to risk it being duped. So like it would really have to be down to like a 3 or a 4-man, maybe slightly larger. But I do think like, not duping in a contest that pays out first really is the name of the game. So that pays out first and nothing else. So maybe, NHL or a few other sports, maybe even NFL, like smaller slates, it's probably fine. Not a high risk of getting duped, but I almost would never in NBA. And I really wouldn't in most other sports, but if I am on short for time, I will, if I think it's low probability of being duped.
Would you recommend your strategy of only playing, and you play some NFL outside of it, would you recommend the strategy to people of only playing contests where you are chasing overlay or reduced rake? Like, would you recommend that strategy, or is it stressful enough and, I guess prolonged enough that it might not be worth it for everybody? Like, to what extent, I guess, would you recommend this strategy to others?
I think you should probably like incorporate some of this in your, like in college DFS, there was a decent amount of overlay for just like, oh, we're running a 50K to first, or the national championship game, the big showdown contest, we're running 100K to first there. And I'm sure they're like slightly concerned it won't fill, so they're willing to eat a little overlay on tickets ahead of time. If you're going to play $50 a night on through bowl season, maybe dedicate some of that to the grind of the overlay. But for the most part, like you are trying to roll up $1 into $1 million a lot of times, or even 100,000 or whatever, or $90 into $200,000. And like I think the average player mostly doesn't have like the bankroll. I mean, like I said, I started out and I didn't realize how bad the downswings could be, and I did not have the bankroll for it, and just got lucky and won a bankroll somewhat early in doing this. Had I not, I'd have probably stopped after a few months and been like, yeah, there's some edge, but I can't handle the downswings. So I think players should be more smart about incorporating this, but I wouldn't. And also like it is stressful. The swings are bad, and you just like waste time building lineups don't matter, which isn't a good feeling. I think it is an edge, but it's not a massive edge unless you know a lot about the sports you're grinding overlay. And it'd be hard to know a lot about La Liga and CSGO, but also NFL and all these things. So I wouldn't recommend doing what I am doing full time. I know some other people. I think his name's like Kevin Falick, works for or is a sub to Run Pure. I noticed in a comment someone's like, "Oh, you played a lot of money this late," and he was like, "Oh, it was all tickets. I wouldn't normally enter this." And I see him grinding a lot of the overlay as well. And some people who are just maxing out the lobby also happen to scoop up all the overlay. But for the most part, like this isn't like much of a. I don't like particularly enjoy doing it in some sense. I enjoy doing it more than I would enjoy doing nothing. Like I like the sweat, I like grinding, and I like having an edge. Like that's part of the enjoyment of the sweat. Like if the cards flip and I am duped in a contest, I'd like to win, but I'm like, oh, that I played bad. That sucks. The night already feels over. So I wouldn't recommend doing it full time like I am, though I think people, especially if you want to win a milli, maybe try and get the tickets at a discount because your odds are so low anyways. At least play with a better edge, but not what I am doing full time. I wouldn't recommend.
Okay. And I just want to get back for a second to the contest because I'm thinking about it more like if I were to do this, because I really like it's something that I should incorporate into my process. I
No,
go
don't worry
through,
about it. Don't
yeah,
worry about
yeah.
it.
I'm probably not going to anyway, to be honest. But I've thought about it many times. Like I need to, like, I should be taking advantage of these opportunities more because really it is the biggest edge if you can find rake free or overlay ideally. Yeah, that's as good as it gets. And most of the contests that I'm playing, typically not finding any of that. So definitely there is more edge there. But then I'm thinking about like different types of sports. Like, are there any sports that you've tried and just like given up on because like you don't know enough about it? Because I mean, as you say, like you're trying not to be duped, so you don't want to just play the optimal lineup. And that's kind of what I was curious about coming in. Is like, are you just like in some of these sports that like if you don't know, I don't know, tennis or like whatever the sport is that like you don't know as well, uh, I would be like tempted to just like, oh well, this is only a there's only going to be 8 people in this contest. It's an 11-person contest. It's only going to fill to 8. I'm just going to throw the optimal in there. Is it what's the balance there like with sports that you don't know as well? Do you still like put in enough work to like make sure that you are able to actually make good lineups for the contest? Like it sounds like you do for NBA. Is that true for like all of these kind of lesser known sports as well? Like do you ever play like tennis DFS, or like are there examples of sports that you have given up on because you're just like, yeah, it's not worth my time, I don't really know this sport, I'm not going to make good lineups? Are there any of those types of sports?
Well, I think Stokastic has projections for almost every sport in the lobby. Like weird soccer stuff, not no. Like you said, I typically don't. Sometimes like the overlay is really good, and you can sort of eyeball what projections might be like for most offensive players by getting Vegas odds, like going to sports books for that. Which oftentimes too, like if Stokastic has like a really for some random CSGO player, like I truly have no clue if someone fat fingered a number or if he's just that good,
Right.
or if I actually do know a little bit about CSGO, or if Simple really is that good. And it turns out Simple really is that good. So you go to like even like Prize Picks or Underdog or whatever also have like actual player props for like CSGO, maybe like League of Legends as well. So basically anything Stokastic has projections for, and even a few things that Vegas odds are easy to double check what your guesswork would be, I will play. But typically if I know less about it, also the thing is like if you know enough about like math, you have a decent idea of ownership and projections, which Awesemo typically does, and especially like you understand like the standard deviations of players, where the how scoring happens. Like in MMA, if you didn't know you shouldn't fight stack, you'd be like, man, this 5-round fight looks great, I'm just going to play
Right.
both the 5-round fights, and you'd end up with lineups that are like locked into three wins, 3 winning fighters and 3 losses. If you didn't know that, you'd just be a dead player. You'd run into so many dead lineups. So yeah, as long as like Stokastic has projections and I understand like the fundamental ways in which points are scored, in which like
Okay.
MMA players, the R squared between them was like 0.8 or whatever. Like one player scores 120, the other player almost certainly scored like less than 30.
Right.
So if I know how the points are scored,
The correlations, essentially. You need
yes,
to know the correlation.
correlations, or just even if it's not correlations, like in soccer, knowing that like two on a 2-game slate, like 1 goal scored will maybe, if it's a low scoring game, be the difference, right? Whereas in NBA, it's not event driven, right? It's a bunch of tiny iterations. So knowing the like fundamental scoring of the points, the fundamental correlations, and having maybe some feel of ownership, if I can do that for a sport, which for most sports I will play it with a certain amount of overlay. Like I won't play tennis at like a 1% edge or whatever in terms of like overlay if it's giving me 1% back, because like I would get killed in tennis if I was just showing up and knew like just the projections, right? I just wouldn't be that good. Soccer is the worst. Soccer I think is probably the hardest lobby there is, for like just standard, like the 3-3-3 or whatever, whatever mid stakes they run in soccer. Like I would get killed if there was no overlay, if it was just a regular rake. If it's rake free, I'd probably still be losing, right? Because I wouldn't know a ton about soccer. If you're giving me 30% overlay because like you're running tickets or stuff, sure, then I'll play. So I do actually have like somewhat of an idea. It's really just guesswork, but of eyeballing how much overlay there would have to be for me to play a sport. And for something like soccer, it is typically really, really high, because I think like, and when you win a ticket, the overlay is great in the $90 contest that pays out a 555 ticket. That 555 ticket will be raked. That contest will fill. So it's worth 500 or whatever. I'm not going to do the math. And then also, I'm going to, in general, be a losing player in that contest, even beyond the breaks. I don't really think about soccer. So that ticket is worth way, way less. So like your eyes deceive you in how much those tickets are worth. So for most sports, though, I will play them because most sports have some low level of overlay. Sometimes it's just like, oh, there's a soccer slate at 12. I'm just working at my computer, like doing some off-season, like, articles way out ahead of time. I can spend 5 minutes pulling together some Wednesday EPL showdown lineup because the $1 contests are half fill. There's only 5 of them, but it's going to cost me 2.5 minutes of my time. But I do and have gotten better. When I first had a little bit of success at this, I was like, I'll take a 1% edge in soccer. Put me in the ring. And, I got killed. And so I do have an idea of like, I think I can play almost any sport. I'm trying to think. I keep looking at my phone, not because I'm on a time crunch. I'm trying to think of the DraftKings lobby. I think I can play pretty much any sport with enough overlay, but I do know there are sports that like, if it's close, I wouldn't even consider playing. Soccer is like the biggest one that sticks out to me. Maybe, I don't know about golf. Forget who, I think it was on Brick Show was saying that like golf, actually might have been on Blenders too. Golf, regular slates of golf might not be too far from being solved. Like they're closer to being solved than NFL is, for instance. Less casual money, easier to project. Like we have really good data on it.
Yeah.
So golf probably would be another one where like overlay would have to be good for me to really consider getting in it.
Yeah. So many things that I wanted to respond to there. First of all, you said that CSGO a little bit. I'm looking at your RotoGrinders profile. I see you got first out of 3,443 entries in an esports contest. Do you remember which esport that was?
No, I have no clue.
Okay, well,
it's probably CS. I played more. I honestly forgot. I think I signed up for that a long time ago. I was like, do they still keep track of that?
This was June 15th, 2021 is when you had the big score on esports. Are you checking on signed up for RotoGrinders profile?
Yeah, I'm saying I forgot I even had a RG profile because I made it so long ago and
last
never
visit February 5th, 2020. Created October 23rd, 2019. I have all the data right in front of me. I can tell you exactly when you signed up for this RotoGrinders profile, the last time you were here.
It was probably CS. It was probably CS. I also just kind of enjoyed CSGO. I'll put it on while I work or whatever. And there's some decent overlay every now and then in CSGO. That would be my guess.
Okay. Just curious about that. But then, okay. So you're talking about chasing overlay, and you're talking about the ticket that you win being like, maybe I won't chase that ticket because of the type of ticket that I would win. So first of all, do you only chase overlay related to, like, do you only look at contests where the prize is a ticket, or sometimes you play overlay in just like regular contests where it's, getting money to first? Because sometimes you do get overlay in regular, GPPs as well. Do you only play the GPPs where the first place is a ticket, or do you sometimes play regular cash contests as well?
Yeah, there's way more overlay in these ticket contests because DraftKings and FanDuel. I started playing on FanDuel this year, trying to like take this more seriously in the sense of like putting in all this time. I'm sure there's some overlay on FanDuel, which was true. I should, be trying to push these edges harder instead of saying like, well, let's like reduce the overlay I get in on DraftKings, but get more down. Like, oh, just like check other sites. I should probably be doing this for like Yahoo. Like Yahoo runs like, I think a break-free NFL contest, a big one. And like,
used to at least, yeah.
I haven't checked. I lost like, I can't even sign into my Yahoo account anymore, which is fine because I never played that much. But like, that's another like thing that like, if you're a casual player, you should probably be playing that contest. Even before you chase like overlay in like the 555 ticket contest or whatever on DraftKings. Like if you know only NFL, play the rake free NFL contest on Yahoo is probably like the best action you'll get down, something like that. But most of the overlay is for tickets. But I would, as someone who had a bunch of equity in tickets last night and realized $0 of said equity, I would kill for a contest that just pays me out dollars. I don't have to win a ticket. I don't have to use that ticket to win another ticket, to enter another contest, to then lose all that money. So I do check for those. It's not super often. It's like some showdowns, like the $5 quintuple up didn't fill. But it's not often. When you get those chances, though, definitely would like to fire on them. Like when FanDuel for their Santa Slam or whatever they called it, the $5 entry on FanDuel. I guess they were just like they free rolled everyone for the contest ahead of time, just as a promotion or something. And that's one, like if you like NBA and are playing it, and you're willing to spend Christmas morning and then late swaps throughout the day, actually, you don't even have to late swap if they're just going to free roll you. But yeah, should play like that contest or whatever. But if I find these elusive contests that just pay out dollars instead of these stupid orange tickets on DraftKings, I'll play them. It's just not super common. It definitely happens though.
Okay, and then next question related to, so because most of these are tickets, so let's say would you be more likely to play a $500 NFL contest that's going to be half filled? 10 out of 20 are going to fill, but the prize is a ticket to a soccer contest, or the reverse, where you're playing a soccer contest
Oh.
where the prize is an NFL ticket. Like, how much does it factor in, like the contest where you're chasing the overlay versus the type of ticket you get? Like, how much does do you factor in the sport that you're trying to win the ticket for?
Yeah, I definitely would factor in. I'm trying to think like specifically to answer your one example. I don't think there's like a difference mathematically. I think
Right.
like I assume it's the same way. It's just which side do you want to get raked over the coals on, as far as me assuming I'm a losing player in soccer in the grand scheme of things. I guess the answer would be you would want to take the overlay in soccer and then pay the rake in NFL, though. That's
Yeah.
probably the right answer.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer. But yeah, I do like if it's a like I was saying earlier, like if it pays out a soccer ticket, overlay better be good, because I know that soccer ticket that is supposedly worth $555 after the rake, and then after me not being a winning player versus the rake in soccer specifically, I know just a little bit of overlay is not enough to cover those losses. And in the reverse, like in NFL, I'm pretty willing to like push it to like break even or so, or even less with my own, obviously my own non-overlay chasing gameplay. Cause like I've had an edge, a small, not a ludicrous edge by any means, but I've been a winning player in NFL for a few years. So I don't mind paying the rake on the ticket I get for that, because I've been winning versus the rake for a few years. So yeah, it makes a huge difference, frankly.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious, like to what extent the actual contest you're entering versus the ticket, like what the ticket's for. So it's a tough equation figuring out like how much do I value this sport that I'm gonna, like NBA,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, you won those 5 tickets to an NBA
Mm-hmm.
millie, which obviously you'd prefer it be an NFL millie because
Yeah.
that is your best sport. But NBA, I would imagine, is maybe a little bit closer to the NFL end of the spectrum than the soccer end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because projections are so much better. Oh yeah, and that
Exactly.
was the other thing I was going to get back to is, I mean, you say that some of these sports, like you don't know them that well, but then Stokastic does great projections, for example, and you need to know enough about the correlations. I suppose then in like NBA, you can the solution, if you don't know NBA at all, would be just you run 50 lineups and just choose one that's not the top optimal. Is that kind of the approach in sports you don't know as well? You just like, okay, I'm not going to play the cash game lineup, but I'm just going to play another one that projects really well that's not a cash game lineup.
I think for most sports, I have somewhat of an idea of
Okay, yeah,
like, oh, it looks like there's a 20-man contest not going to fill. Even if I'm not playing the cash game lineup in NHL, say, like, I'm not going to also say, like, oh, I'm going to run the two top stacks just that run in the projections and then switch out one defender, right? I don't want to be a 1v1 off the cash game either.
right,
And this, like, I will try to gauge MLB is a good one where like, oh, this super cheap value pitcher is just going to be owned like crazy because he wasn't expected to get the start, was underpriced, but like the team's only minus 125 favorites, right? He could go out and get blown up. Like there is leverage to be had there. I don't think I am as good as I could be at that because I don't know the sports that well, but just using ownership projections and knowing the correlations, if there are positive or negative correlations, knowing those, like I will try and eyeball like what is a good leverage lineup roughly. Like
yeah,
if I were playing these with the entire rake, this almost certainly wouldn't be enough, probably.
yeah,
But with the overlay, it is. So it's a little more than just picking out a random lineup, because I can kind of gauge. I have some idea of gauging how many projected points I'm willing to give up to have have somewhat amount of leverage in my lineup.
yeah.
But it's less scientific than it would need to be versus like a full rigged contest.
So
I
you know
assume.
what you're doing. I was just trying to figure out how I can take advantage of overlay in sports that I don't know. If I want to get into NHL, like, oh, maybe I could just play, but no, then you need to know correlations and stuff. So you do need to know somewhat like the sports and the game theory involved in the different sports,
Yeah,
the
the game theory
correlations,
more than
etc.
anything.
Yeah,
Assuming Stokastic has me covered on the projections, and
yeah,
even if they don't do ownership, like I don't think they do tennis ownership, like I can build the highest projected lineup and a few more lineups and be like, okay, like these two value plays plus these two 9K players, like that looks like what is the way to build the top optimal lineups. It will probably be rostered with a relatively high degree. How can I change the build or maybe just get direct leverage off of one of these players? So yeah, assuming Stokastic has me covered at least on projections, it helps to have ownership. But sometimes I can tell you that the highest the 3K point guard getting 35 minutes, I guess he's going to be pretty popular. So because they feed back into each other, as long as I have projections, I have enough of the game theory covered to where I think there's an edge with the overlay, if the overlay is good enough.
okay. So we're running a little bit short on time, and I've got my closing out question. But before I get there, I always want to talk just a little bit of best ball, and I'm curious because you're such an NFL guy. Yeah. Have you been grinding these NFL playoff best ball?
Not the playoff best ball.
Okay.
I have a few playoff best ball drafts. I haven't been grinding them because I've been busy with work. But yeah, I'll have a few done. And you played a lot of best ball, mostly on DraftKings. For as bad as their product is, so are the drafters. Sometimes, not always.
So you played some regular season best ball then. You're not doing the playoff as much, but you did do a good amount of regular season best ball.
Yeah, a ton, the whole summer up until the last day playing just drafting best ball. Like just take my dog for a walk, best ball on the phone, two of them, multi-table it. And I'll have some entries into the underdog ones like the mitten or whatever, and a few on the DraftKings one as well. DraftKings, I haven't done I have like a few tickets to it, and apparently they kept the 20-man rosters for the playoffs. Jesus,
yeah, it's
they just don't care at all.
I did do one DraftKings, so I was just very curious, like what these contests look like.
Who are you drafting? Who are the 18th round picks?
20th round picks. Yeah,
Jesus.
It gets pretty ugly. I think that you're still drafting players who might see the field at that point. Like I was curious.
I was honestly curious.
Are we really getting to the point where like
yes,
drafting players you don't even play? I think that they are players who
it's like showdown. You're like taking like, oh man, this guy's gonna see 30 snaps throughout the playoffs. He's a great 18th, 20th round pick.
Yeah, it
is like
ugly.
Like backup, really third string tight end. But Noah Fant's actually questionable. And what if he doesn't play and his backup doesn't play? Colby Parkinson or whatever, looking hot for the 20th round.
Right.
Man.
Yeah, it's a different. It was an interesting decision to just like not put any effort into it. Just like, yeah, we'll just run out the exact same type of contest as we did for the regular season. We'll see how it works out. I'm hoping for some overlay. I haven't looked today. If it was looking like we're probably going to see some overlay in the contest, okay, cool. So maybe worth grinding. But okay, yeah, I was just curious the extent that you're playing best ball, and sounds like so you play regular season. You haven't done as much playoff best ball, but a game that you are interested in playing.
Oh yeah, I'll play. I've done one or two drafts on underdog, and okay. I'll do a bunch. I'll end up doing a bunch. We still got time.
That's true. We got
Thursday.
A
couple days. I work tomorrow. Probably do a bunch then while I work, and again on Saturday morning. Just haven't done a ton of drafts yet. So
okay. Well then, I won't really ask you too much about your strategy yet, because you're probably still figuring out what your strategy is for playoff best ball. Is that kind of do you have a general playoff best ball strategy? Are there teams that you're seeking, like this is the team that's going to make the Super Bowl? How much are you trying to correlate? And do you think you're going to be playing underdog or DraftKings or drafters, or where are you going to be playing for the playoffs?
I'll play both. You mentioned drafters too. I haven't looked at drafters yet. I don't know what their format is like. I know what DraftKings and underdog is. Yeah, like nothing too crazy. I think maybe the Cowboys are underpriced. Like people think of them as like having this terrible year. They were like 6th in points scored. Dak was like a top 5 quarterback in EPA per play if you don't look at interceptions, which like, God, that guy had some of the dumbest interceptions from his receivers. What was the game they lost where one of the receivers just like volleyball set it
Noah Brown? I want to add it.
It was probably, yeah, I don't think it was CD, so it was probably Noah Brown or Michael Gallup. Volleyball set it for like a pick 6. I think they lost that game. But that wasn't the only one. That was the worst one, because I think that one was a pick 6. But he has other ones like that where like PFF has him like 15th in turnover worthy plays, and he leads the NFL in interceptions. So
Right.
I think the Cowboys are a little underpriced based on underdog ADP. I haven't even looked at DraftKings ADP yet. That was the first thing I noticed. I did like 2 drafts and noticed that.
Especially because they lost their last game to Washington. So I think people are just like, at this point, people are really out on Dallas.
Right. Yeah.
So they've dropped even more. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting team to target. But to what extent are you playing for the Super Bowl versus just trying to get there? Like, do you have a feel for like, I'm building specifically for, try to have the strongest team in the Super Bowl versus what's that kind of balance look like for you?
I think because I guess I am building a lot for the Super Bowl because most of my teams are AFC, NFC stacks. And I think you can maybe get lost in doing a bit too much of that. But for the most part, I do think like team stacking, underpriced teams, and getting 2 teams in the Super Bowl. And assuming they get there, they've played, especially if you get one of them not being the bye week team, you will just accumulate a ton of points. Like the first drafts I had were like both Dallas stacks and different teams in the AFC. But I think assuming you are stacking, you do via that end up playing for the Super Bowl or bust essentially, because you'll either go into the Super Bowl with a whole team of players or maybe 2 whole teams of players or none, and you'll have lost by then.
Yeah. It's my general, like I'm obviously you're always building for the Super Bowl because it's such a top heavy tournament that it's like you're not trying to min cash here. You're trying to win the whole damn thing, especially on underdog. The latest gauntlet is 200,000 to first, 25,000 to third. Like it's just like the drop off is so dramatic that it's like, if
that's a true DFS drop off. They've done
if you're not building for the Super Bowl, then you're screwed in that contest. So definitely makes sense. And sounds like we have a similar kind of thought process of building AFC, NFC, trying to build out a whole lineup for the Super Bowl. Anyway, enough about best ball. I love talking about best ball more than I think everybody loves hearing about it sometimes. So we'll leave it at that for best ball, and we'll go to the closeout question. We have to save some time for this. Tell me about your favorite win or win celebration.
It's either when I won second place, didn't even win second place in the MLB Millie, like one of the high stakes Millies last year. Even like told my girlfriend like, oh, like I probably have like 20% equity in first, and I had pretty good equity for like top 3 or whatever. So it wasn't like the most terrifying sweat because I was like, obviously like much looking back on it now, having had other like high stakes or just close calls in general, would have been nice to win that Millie. But at the time I hadn't won anything more than like 20 grand or something. So like the next step up, and I think that's always what it is. It's like the next step up. The first time I won 2 grand in like 2016 or whatever, for a while would have been like the most exciting night of watching football in my life. It's probably the MLB one, or winning the seat to the hockey championship, because that was at that time another big step up for me. And both times have been like stepping up my play volume and finding some results to match that as like proof of concept in a way. Obviously, it's incredibly random when these things happen or if they happen, but getting some validation was nice. I'll go with the baseball one. Girlfriend went to bed. I stayed up alone sweating. And I think that is like the most consistent theme of this show is just being alone. Like
I'm by myself. Yep.
I wonder, loneliness seems to be a consistent thread of like DFS players. I'm sure that's not like bad.
To be fair, a lot of it is just like it's late night. Like the rest of the world has gone to bed. Us DFS players are still up watching our lineups most of the time. So I think it's. I mean, sure, that's definitely a part of it. Like a lot of people don't have girlfriends in DFS, but even those of us who do have significant others, like by the time the win comes for a lot of sports, obviously not like NFL main slates, but for like NBA, a lot of these sports, MLB, it's like it's happening at midnight or 1 a.m. if you're on the East Coast. So it kind of makes sense that people would be in bed. Was that tough for you? Like second place is always so much tougher than first because there's that extra what if. Like first place, it's like there's no what if. I won the damn thing. It doesn't matter what if could have happened. Second place, there's always that like, oh, what if this one play had gone differently. I kind of remember that you had like it was a legitimate sweat, and it was Whistles Go ended up getting you.
He needed it. We were really all pulling for him to get his 9th or whatever.
Exactly. We had to cheer for Whistles there.
I think it felt okay because one, it was 10 times more than I had ever made in one night at that point. So that sort of cushions the blow. And I could tell that I had pretty good like second, third place equity and very low first place equity because he had like a whole like Yankee stack or something. And I was like, he's almost got me beat already. I really need to run good through like the next 6 innings, which just wasn't likely or whatever. So I think the second time you get second, which not for a million hasn't happened to me, but I've gotten second a lot of other times. The second time you get second has to be a lot worse because like the high of getting a lot of money has worn off. That's happened before. And now like having gotten second and other stuff other times, even for what would have been less money than $200,000, those seconds you're like, Jesus Christ, like I like you get second like enough times in a row, and it really is very frustrating. The first time it wasn't nearly as bad. I even talked about it on Twitter, like trying to have a positive mindset of like also like, yeah, I think I lost by like a strikeout or whatever, but I also beat third through sixth by a strikeout, right? So like even at the top,
much worse.
Yeah, exactly. Even at the top, like the variance running bad on not getting first ran good to not get sixth, which really would have been like nothing because the way these contests pay out, like 15 grand or whatever, which was like a triple up on the equity I had in the contest versus a 40x or whatever. So tried to have a positive mindset. Did that night. The sting of second has gotten me other times though.
Yeah. And it's easier to get second when second comes with 200,000. Like a lot of content, even milli makers oftentimes will have like 100,000 to second. That's a lot more brutal than 200,000. Like that's like, oh yeah, that's real money. So it's still a very nice celebratory night when you're getting 200,000 for second, as opposed to like, 100,000 first, 10,000 a second. Like a lot of those kind of contests, it's tougher than so yeah. It's definitely something to celebrate when you can win $200,000, even if you were that close to the million. And then this NHL one, I wasn't aware that you won a ticket to the NHL final before this. Was that also an overlay chasing contest?
Yeah, it was like months or just weeks after I started this. I think this all started where I tweeted out, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of overlay in these contests. And I think Blender tweeted back at me. He was like, if you think there's a lot, you should try and grind it. And I did a little bit, and it's been more consistent ever since. So yeah, that was in the COVID year. So they didn't even do an in-person final. It was the, whatever they call it, Hockey World Championship, but it was the only one they'll ever run that I don't get to go anywhere for.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer, that whole, I mean, obviously it happened to a lot of people. We lost out on finals for that year, but hopefully you'll have other finals that you can go to in the future. All right. Well, I know that you were short on time, so we can close up here. Kyle, where can people find you?
Find me on Twitter at Kyle Tweets Here. I tweet out all my NFL stuff there, and that's about it. You can check me out on NBC Sports Edge at pretty much any time.
All right, NBC Sports Edge and at Kyle Tweets Here on Twitter. Thanks a lot, Kyle, for coming on. Really fun conversation as expected. Thanks to Mike Lawrence for producing as always. And thank you for watching High Stakes episode 29. You'll be able to catch High Stakes episode 30, I believe, next Friday. I think we're going to have a new episode next Friday. So check that out Friday afternoon. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend.